leaders of the world. Welcome to Spread Love in Organizations, a podcast for purpose-driven healthcare leaders striving to make life better around the world by leading their teams with genuine care, servant leadership, and love. I'm Naji, your host for this episode, having the privilege to chat today with a social transformer, a professor and incredible leader, Otto Scharmer. Otto is a senior lecturer at MIT and co-founder of the Presencing Institute. He chairs the MIT Ideas program for cross-sector innovation and introduced the concept of presencing, learning from the emerging future, in his best-selling books, Theory U and Presence. He is co-author of Leading from the Emerging Future, which outlines 8 acupuncture points for transforming capitalism. His most recent book, The Essentials of Theory U, summarizes the core principles and applications of awareness-based system change, a must-read. In 2015, Otto co-founded the MITx u.lab, and in 2020, the GAIA Journey, which have activated a vibrant worldwide ecosystem of transformational change involving more than 200,000 users from 185 countries. Otto is a member of the UN Learning Advisory Council for the 2030 Agenda, the World Future Council, and the Club of Rome's high-level 21st Century Transformational Economics Commission. Otto has won several prizes and received in 2021 the Elevating Humanity Award from the Organizational Development Network. Otto, I am so humbled to have you with me today and looking forward to our chat.
Thank you for having me on.
Otto, I would love to learn more about your personal story. From economics in Germany to MIT, the United Nations, and several prestigious institutions, what's in between the line of your impressive leadership journey?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it all starts at the beginning, right? And often, I mean, in my case, I probably are indebted to the early years of my life and influenced by them a lot more than I'm probably aware of. So my parents were pioneers of, have been and still are, my father is still alive, pioneers of regenerative farming. So they converted their farm in northern Germany some 65 years ago from a conventional farm to regenerative practices, something which was considered crazy back then, but now kind of everyone talks about in the light of the climate crisis and so forth. So that was certainly one big influence of my life, to also realize that there is a way you can, I mean, there's an old industrial paradigm of agriculture where it's basically the input-output model, right? To get something out, you need to put in lots of fertilizers and, pesticides and this. And so it's like a mechanistic view, you could say, of agriculture. And from a regenerative point of view, you really look at food and farming from a different perspective, more like as a medium for healing planet and people. And in other words, more from a whole ecosystem perspective, an ecological perspective, you realize that a lot with the new farming has to do with relating to customers and other stakeholder groups in a different way. So it's a social system, but then also it is, to some degree, a spiritual system, because there's kind of a new consciousness, kind of more like a planetary consciousness that comes with seeing nature as not something, as a dead body, kind of basically as a heap of material that's for us to use without mindfulness, but more like a living being, right? That we are co-evolving with, and that we need to be respectful of, and that we need to learn to listen to. So those things, in a way, I mean, not with these words, but more like an attitude, I would say. I grew up with, and then I went to school in Hamburg. So that was a very different culture, right? You have kind of the rural environment, the village culture, and then the city, kind of where the school is, and the train in between. So that already kind of early on gives you two very different cultures. And also the idea that kind of the way people talk, the way what they consider important and so on, that can be very different in different places. So I picked that up early on, and I would say kind of the next influence in my life probably was not too far from a farm, actually, is one of the big battlefields of these. So now I'm going to age myself, of the 1970s. So that's when I was a teenager, around the new energy system, right? So something that's mainstream now, again. So it's kind of the main thing in this. But back then, there was a real movement. And it came together with the birth of the environmental movement in Europe back then, really mobilizing against the overly centralized energy system, and also anticipating a lot of the issues that we now have with nuclear waste, right? That was before 3 Mile Island and before Chernobyl and Fukushima, but the issues were already pretty much discussed in the public. So that happened. One of the major plans and battlefields of that movement was not far from our farm. So it was quite natural for me, like most people in my generation, to participate in that and to become aware of, some of the environmental and social issues that we deal with as a society, and also realize that a lot of the root issues that deal with them actually has to do with how we think about our economic relationships and how we organize our economic ways of generating value and generating well-being in society. And that really sparked my own interest in how to better understand and deeper understand leadership and management and innovation, and really kind of economic well-being from a more systems thinking based point of view. And that brought me to MIT because I realized that just writing about what should happen and so on is worth nothing unless you can be relevant to the real change makers, the real leaders, the real entrepreneurs and innovators in the world. So that's what brought me here to MIT, and that's kind of what has been influencing my work since.
Wow, what a journey. And you've already touched on amazing topics I'd like to dig into. You talked about system dynamics, about social impact. You talked about also the environment, and more than respecting the planet, it's really seeing nature as a living being. I love this concept. And obviously about leadership, which also something, we talked a lot, both of us. I had the privilege to talk with you about. Let's start, if you allow me, if we can go first on Theory U, what you created and what you wrote about, and potentially talk about these different topics you shared in the beginning of what shaped you as we go along. But if we go to this Theory U, I'm one of the big fans of this. If I would love to hear it from your words and how this, in fact, is impacting and obviously will help us as leaders change the world.
Well, I mean, the Theory U concept really came from listening, right? And listening to whom to. So I did in the 1990s, a dialogue study together with colleagues, with 150 leaders and innovators in business and science, in the creative arts, really looking at kind of what's the story of people who really created something new in their own field, in their own domain. And there were like two things that struck me, right? And I want to give for each of them an example, because in a way it gives you in a nutshell of what Theory U is about. The first one is in talking and interviewing the late CEO of Hanover Insurance, Bill O'Brien. He claimed that, reflecting on his many years of leading transformational change as a CEO, he claimed that the success, so that's kind of was his kind of concluding thought, basically, on his own experience. The success of an intervention, he said, depends on the interior condition of the intervener. Let me repeat. The success of what I do as a leader, as a change maker, depends on the inner place from that I operate. And when I heard that, it was almost as if a light bulb went on, right? Because I realized, well, wow, right? In leadership, we know everything about what leaders do, successful leaders do. We know a lot about how they do it, right? The process dimension of leading and managing. We learned a lot about that. But what is it that we know about the source from that we operate as leaders, as change makers? Almost nothing. And why is that? Well, if you put a camera into the room, well, tell me where's the source, right? You can't see it, right? You see the what, you see the how, you can't see the source. That means to investigate the source, we need to access first person, second person knowledge, right? You need to talk to people. You need to make them reflect on, right, their interior dimension of leadership. And of course, leadership and change and entrepreneurship, right, is profoundly shaped by our own experience, by our own interior dimension. So we need to look at that, right? Because it's not all the same. So they're like different qualities. And what can we learn about them? So, and that's kind of what set me on a path to describe this interior dimension with words that today, or with today I would, describe this interior dimension in terms of three capacities: open mind, open heart, open will, aka curiosity, compassion or love, and courage. So that's the first experience, right? Talking with Bill O'Brien. But here's the with Bill O'Brien. But here's the other one. So with my colleague Joe Jaworski, I went to Xerox Park, and we interviewed Brian Arthur, kind of the former head of the economics department of the Santa Fe Institute for Complexity Studies. So he was, he's a well-known economist, and kind of he really got well known for his work about increasing returns, basically, arguing that in increasing return markets, like other words, high-tech markets, kind of a whole different way of, you need a whole different way, not only a whole different way of reasoning and competing, but also a different style of economics, right? That is dealing with that phenomenon, and a different methodological underpinning. So in talking with him, he was and talking about what it really takes to be successful in these types of new competitive environments. He basically also talked about these interior dimensions, but more in terms of a different process, right, that he described. So he basically said this, he said there are two different types of cognition. One is more like a surface cognition, which he referred to with the word downloading, right? And downloading is basically you use existing frameworks and concepts, basically the stuff that we learned in school, right? And you apply that, you lower that and apply it to a given situation, right? So that's like standard ways of operating. And then he said, there's something, I think he used something like the term deep cognition or so, right? So there's a deeper process of cognition, and that applies when you deal with something new. For that, you don't have any concept. And he said, when you deal with this deeper process of cognition, it's actually a different mental capacity. It's not more of the first one, right? It's not more memorizing, but it's a very different human cognitive capacity. And then when we asked him so whether he could describe this capacity, he basically went through, I'm summarizing now a little bit, but he went through 3 stages that can be summarized with 1, observe, observe, observe. So you basically observe, observe, observe means you totally, so when you want to study something new, right? So nothing, let's say, and nobody knows something about, you need to go out, right, to the places that matter most to that situation and totally immerse yourself into these environments. So observe, observe, observe is number 1. Number 2 is retreat and reflect. Allow the inner knowing to emerge. Those were the words he used. So he also said, on the second one, go to the inner place of stillness where knowing comes to surface. So while in the first one, you're out in the field, you're absorbing, you're listening, you're taking in. The second one really is about deep reflection and deep sense making, right? And not only sense making to what was it, so about synthesizing what we heard out there and all these different conversations, but it's also connecting with your own deeper self, connecting with your own unfolding story and your own what story of the future that you want to be part of as an entrepreneur. So that's number 2. And then so he said, when we are lucky, right, something is emerging from that moment of stillness, right? A spark or 2, like an idea or 2. And then the third stage is, and so these were the words he used, act in an instant, right? So rather than planning this thing to death and going through another cycle of analysis paralysis, you move into a process of rapid prototyping, right? Of rapid cycle prototyping. Basically exploring the future by doing. And of course, we now describe this cycle, particularly with design thinking, all these concepts that are now more and more common. But back then it was really a lot more new. So, and that's really the 3 stages that he described. And that in essence is the theory U, right? So it's kind of observe, observe, observe is really getting out of your own bubble, right? That's the main thing. The more successful you are, the more you're at risk to get stuck inside your own bubble, right? The higher you up in your own hierarchical system, the more you're a victim to that you're only fed information that people think you want to hear. So observe, observe, observe is basically get outside your own bubble, and both the personal bubble but also the institutional bubble. And then retreat and reflect, allow the inner knowing to emerge. That's really about resonance, right? It's about kind of connecting with your deeper levels of experience and also with your own feelings, not in order to displaying emotions or something like that, but as an organ of perception, right? Because the resonance you feel in your own feeling gives you information about the world, gives you information about an opportunity, right? That's why all true entrepreneurship, all true innovation really begins with a sense of opportunity, something we are sensing. We sense something before we can see it, right? And before we can articulate that. And that's kind of, it's very much related to the entrepreneurial process and the innovator's journey. And then the third stage, of course, with prototyping, act in an instant, really is turning your, doing something very quickly and locally and small, and then listening to the feedback of the universe, right? Because as another interviewee shared with me, the universe is a helpful place, right? It wants to suggest ways of helping us as entrepreneurs, but often these suggestions suck, right? So we need to discern. We need to learn to discern what is really suggestions that speak to our own idea, to our own intention, and what is just input that talks about someone else's idea, right? So what is it you need to take in, and what is it of the feedback you receive that you can ignore? So those three things are basically, from a 50,000 foot point of view, I think the process architecture. That's the outer process. But the inner process is what this other guy was talking about, Bill O'Brien, right? Learning how to open the mind, open the heart, open the will, aka accessing your curiosity, your compassion and empathy, by which I mean really looking at a situation not just from your own angle, but through the eyes of your partners, of your customers, of your stakeholders that you're dealing with. And open will really is the capacity to let go and let come, right? Let go of the old, maybe identities that were useful for us yesterday, but maybe not tomorrow, maybe not helping us now to take the next step, and let come of emerging future possibilities.
Wow. This is so powerful. Both sides of the story and how you're framing it, Otto. And yet we see a lot of leaders struggling with listening, with observing, as you said, and also all this part about our inner person, right? Taking the time to understand ourselves, our emotions, and what's going to, I love this idea of saying, when you get this idea, just act on it and prototype it and try to move forward. In this world of, constant change, speed, many leaders I talk to, they feel, overwhelmed in healthcare, but not only in healthcare. And I constantly hear the word, we don't have the time. Like this takes time. Observing takes time. Listening takes time. So we need to make decisions. We need to move faster, right? And yet, real social change agent and leaders and entrepreneurs find the time to do this. Any thoughts, any advice, reflections for us and how to deal with this?
Yeah, I mean, to go fast, you need to go slow first, right? To go broad in terms of impact, you need to go narrow and deep first. So, of course, that's a challenge, right? If the pressure is up, and if the whole culture is about go, 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 act, then to go slow, to reflect, and to maybe move out of your own bubble. What is the bubble? Bubble is habitualized behavior, right? In your thinking, in your communication, and in your acting. If you want to get out of your bubble, which is the essence of innovation and which is the essence of the U process, well, you need to slow down. You need to stop, right? Stop. Learning how to stop is the first thing any kind of leader needs to do. And of course, that's hard to do. No one wants to hear that. And that's the very reason why you have this thing called leadership, right? If you could automate that, if it's easy, well, but just make it part of management, right? So then, then you don't need to be paid as a leader, right? So then we don't need you, right? The reason leaders have their job is to do that. Yes, it's hard to do, but because that's why you have your role, right? And if it would be easy, we already would have an algorithm for it, and that would take care of it. We didn't need you.
And as you've been going through labs, you coached, you taught so many leaders around the world, like 185 countries you've touched, and you worked with leaders from those countries. Any specific trait or a common trait or capability potentially for leaders who you've seen really successful? If you need to pick one, I know through Theory you have 7 capabilities leaders develop. But in the 21st century, is there one that you think crucial for us moving forward?
That's a great question. Well, I would say it has. So I don't have a good term for that, but I can describe it. I would say it has to do with the human heart as a source of intelligence. So you have, I mean, if you look into organizations, right, you have certain cultures and certain leaders that are completely head-centric driven, right? So it's all about, I mean, it's, a different way of saying it is just, it's completely lacking the human dimension, right? And so it's all technical and it's all, basically objectives. It doesn't have resonance. It doesn't have deeper level human connections. However, if you are an executive leader or a frontline leader, right? Most people, and that's my experience, if you put this deeper level, theory U basically is blending deep systems change with leadership, right? Kind of, if you put a model in front of them, I was amazed how many people, when they have had real life experience, right? And that's either leadership experience or frontline experience as a leader or operator. And often those change experiences are experiences of letting go and letting come. So in essence, theory U is about leading by letting go, letting come, right? As I explained before. So I think that is, so this process of letting go, letting come is a process that is preparing you for this deeper, I mean, that has prepared you for a deeper approach to leadership. And and it has to do with the dimension of the human heart. And here's what I mean with human heart. So theory U essentially is about moving beyond like a traditional worldview where it's just kind of the analytical worldview, kind of where people are objects to each other. They are outside of each other. And it's inclusive of a deeper level of human connection where we truly connect with each other, where we can connect with each other on a more meaningful way, where we can move from transactional patterns of relationship to transformative patterns of relationship, where we can participate in situations of true creativity or kind of moments of kind of high performance in a team situation. And many leaders have experience of that in the better moments, right, of their career, right, in the better moments of the team experiences. But we often lack the concepts for that. And so I would say this deepened relationship that you have is something that many experiences, including the last 2 years of COVID, right, which essentially has been an experience of letting go and letting come. I mean, COVID has been a mirror to us about everything that's broken with our society, right? And if we keep ignoring what's broken, it will just hit us harder next time around, right? We learn that time and again. And so in that way, systems thinking-based leadership is about closing the feedback loop, right? The feedback loop between our collective behavior on the one hand and our concepts that we apply in order to shape reality going forward. So I would say this, when you deal these moments of disruptions, and we just are going through right now as a society through a major moment of disruption with COVID, but the next one is already around the corner, right? With the planetary disruption that's coming our way, with the climate crisis, with that is, playing out also here in the US and in so manifold ways. but also in many other countries. So as this is coming our way, I think we as leaders, we as change makers are confronted with a type of challenge that requires us to upgrade our operating system, to upgrade our toolkit, to upgrade our capacities, how we respond to that. And while in the past it often has been sufficient to basically learn from our experiences and kind of adapt to what's happening, when you deal with truly disruptive change, just learning from the past is not good enough. What we need to learn is to learn, if you want, from the emerging future, to learn by sensing and stepping into emerging future possibilities. So if you want, it's, in my view, the essence of leadership is about sensing and actualizing emerging future possibilities. And the question is how we do that. And that's really what I have studied as an action researcher for the past 20 years. And what I've found is something very simple. It's not more of the old model, right? It's not more of action reflection cycle. No, what it takes is to activate a deeper process of human cognition. And that is that the way to connect to emerging future possibility is twofold. One, you need to go to the edges of the system, right? You need to move yourself outside of your own bubble. And two, you need to activate your deeper sources of knowing, right? Open mind, open heart, open will. Those are, but the most important of these three is the open heart. So it's because it has to do with the sensing capacity, feeling yourself into emerging possibilities so that we can connect with them and co-shape them rather than being victimized by them. I think that's at the heart, that's at the essence of the leadership today. And that's why the one word that I would point to is leading by not only activating the intelligence of the mind, but also activating the intelligence of the heart. And I think that has a lot to do with your podcast also, and with the success of your podcast, because many people feel that, even though they don't have a concept really about that. But I think it's something that we all will develop a lot more literacy around going forward.
Thank you. Thank you for that. The human heart as a source of intelligence. I love it. And yeah, hopefully there will be more literacy and more practice, more and more leaders doing it and really leading from a place of love. Otto, I would love now to give you one word and get your top of mind thought around this word.
Sure.
So the first one is presencing.
Yeah, presencing is a blended word composed of two, which is sensing, kind of feeding forward, and presence, right? The current moment, right? So presencing means feeding the future in the now and embodying what you feel in the now.
What about institutional leadership?
Well, institutional leadership, I think the essence, I already mentioned what my definition of leadership is. Leadership is the capacity of a system to sense and step into the future, right? Sense and shape the future, if you want. But what more specifically, what I believe institutional leadership needs to do today is almost inverting institutions, right? You need to turn outside what we used to do inside. And you need to internalize what we used to consider outside, right? So that, of course, we have been doing in the business community for a few years, right? Kind of when you think about moving R&D kind of from something from internal headquarters to the periphery of the system. When you think about biotech in the Cambridge area, it's kind of a lot of pharmaceutical companies, right, outsource the R&D kind of to the startups here in the larger Cambridge area. But so that's an example of turning inside out, but you also need to turn something outside in, and that's all the environmental considerations, kind of the considerations around the planet, the well-being really of not only our own smaller, narrow community, but of the larger community, as we can see in the COVID situation and so forth. So there is, I would say, and eventually kind of the whole health and mental health situation is something that also needs to be addressed in the same regard. So I would say the future of institutional leadership is about inverting institutions from silos to living ecosystems, right? And the ecosystem is the whole set of communities and stakeholders that we are touching with our business ecosystem and that we are in service of. So that's far beyond the boundaries of our own institutions. And that's why this inverting siloed institutions towards ecosystem breathing, right? Where we connect with and coordinate with the stakeholder systems around us will be one of the core functions of leadership going forward.
Before giving you another word, you touched many times the climate change, the environmental, really accountability practically that all of us we have as leaders. So I'm in healthcare and sometimes say, okay, no, it's healthcare, we should not touch it. But the more, I'm into system dynamics and understand how things work, the more I really believe that everything is interlinked, in fact, on this planet, and our work as leaders in every single industry or function has to do beyond only the industry we have. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, all this climate change, what we should be doing as leaders to improve and take care of the planet that is not a resource, but that, as you said, is a living being for us.
Well, I think it comes with, when you look at the evolution of certain sectors in business and society, I think you can track an evolution from input and authority centric, I call it 1.0, to output and efficiency centric, that's something I call 2.0, to number 3, user centric, right? So where you really, for example, in a healthcare system, you organize around patient journeys. In a school system, you organize around the student-centric learning architecture and so forth. To something that I would call 4.0, which I would describe as regenerative and ecosystem-centric. And in the health domain, that would mean to move from approaches that just address the symptoms of pathology to strengthening the sources of well-being. So an example of that is a small example, right? It's not the full, but a small example of that is social determinants of health, right? So that in order to strengthen the sources of health, you of course need to go way beyond the healthcare delivery system, right? And you need to touch on a lot of community functions, the quality of food, kind of the quality, basically work experience. It's our work environment that makes us sick mostly, right? So all of these things then come more to the foreground when you think about healthcare and in a more holistic way. And when you look into when you now look into the health discussions, what is it that everyone is talking about? Planetary health. You cannot be thinking about human health without planetary health. It is so obvious, right? If you take away the planet, there is nothing left for us, right? The economy is gone, health is gone, everything is gone. So everything starts with the quality of the planetary well-being in our environment, which is the foundation of everything else, right? Not only economic, but also culturally. And so in that regard, of course, when you look at from a historical perspective, right? So we have been building a civilization, basically the past 200 years or so, basically by burning fossil fuel, right? Well, that was, we created a lot of wealth for at least a number of people, but it's, of course, completely unsustainable. And we are about, if we continue on the same path, to wreck the planet, right? So we are moving beyond planetary boundaries that put us at a very high risk area of destabilizing not only the climate on the planet, but also biodiversity conditions and so forth. So that's who we are as human beings, right? So the human journey is something like that. First, we screw up everything. Then we realize what we did, we become aware of it, and then we can actually fix it, right? I think that's also true. It's often a story not told, kind of how much. There's a wonderful documentary. So it's PBS, I think it's The Age of Nature. So highly recommended. And it shows, it shares from around the world amazing stories where ecosystems have been regenerated. And that's the second part. So the first part of the human story is we screw up everything, but then we wake up, we understand, right, how ecosystems work. That's who the human being is. We actually can understand systems. And then we can redefine our role, right? And kind of reshape the economy of something that is just extracting something out of nature, right? As we did with the old farming model or also the old energy model, really. It's the same thing towards regenerating, right? And that's well possible. And it's the big revolution that's going on in this century. And we are at the midst of that, And that's why, as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, we are in the absolutely key role in that, because everyone else is just basically complaining, right, about what should happen in the economy. But if you are, the wonderful thing about business and about entrepreneurship is that's the only sector in society where you can put together the entire production function, right? That's where really the source of all the problems, but also all the solutions are. And that's why we are in this critical sector. And regardless whether you're already part of a regenerative business or not, whether you're part of an extractive business, in both cases, what we bring in and our efforts to extend our understanding and to redefine the role that we have as business leaders in society is of utmost importance. Because basically, what depends on that? Well, it's just the future of humanity.
I hear hope, which is great that we can fix it, but also a responsibility for all of us to fix it.
Absolutely.
The last word I'd love you to react on is spread love in organizations.
Well, spread love. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is kind of what's a word that we could also use, right? If maybe some people say or at first have a reaction to love that maybe that's not the place in business, and I would say, just to move into this direction, a first half step into it is spread appreciation. So that's, I think, often, right, if you work in traditional business environments, appreciation is a currency that is highly undervalued. And without appreciation, particularly, most of us now coming out of COVID, maybe sometimes we don't know, everyone, everyone in every single family, you have mental health issues, right? Particularly if you have younger people in your family. But regardless of the generation, really, kind of the mental health, the stress, the anxiety disorder, the depression. And I think one of the main, I wouldn't use the word healing, but one of the main forces, right, to really deal with these issues is appreciation, right? Is appreciation of each other, is of our situation, kind of what's still working for us, and kind of so this is, I think, kind of the capacity to appreciate is very central, really, for all human health, I would say. And then, love in organizations, I do believe it is at, pretty much at the source of everything. And I remember a very well-known, famous action researcher here in Cambridge. So he was a Harvard professor, and he's one of the great innovators of organizational learning. And the later part of the last century, Chris Argyris, and he once said that the only way to do good work as a consultant is to love your client, right? And I think that's totally true, right? So if you so that's what he says as a consultant, right? But I would say the only way to do your best work as a leader is to love the people and the larger ecosystem you're in service of as a leader, right? So because what does love mean, right? What love really means in this context is the capacity to see someone else in their highest future possibility and to support them in getting there. That's what love is. And that's what leadership is. So from that regard, there's not much of a difference. And that's why with your intuition and with your podcast, you're right on the money.
Thank you so much, Otto, for those words. Any final word of wisdom for leaders around the world?
Well, not much really. I think kind of maybe the word of wisdom. Oh, I may have some. It's a quote from. Let me just look it up. Give me one sec. It's a wonderful quote of an Aboriginal leader that I did a session with a little while ago. And it is summarizing in such a wonderful, simple term a key aspect of leadership that we haven't fully covered yet, and that's why I want to read it in closing the session. His name is Dr. Noel Nannup, and he is Aboriginal Noongar elder from Australia. And here's the quote: "All we need to do is to have a piece of the path to the future that is ours. And we polish that, and we hone that, and we place that in the pathway that we are building. And of course, as we build that pathway, it changes us as the builders of the path, and it also shapes the destination where we are going." So what he's basically saying is, it's all good, but at the end of the day, there's only one thing that counts, which is what is mine to do, right? And today, there's so much happening in the world, and often, frankly, people are discouraged by what we see. And they think, oh, it's so big, everything that's going wrong, whatever I do is so insignificant, right? So I lose. And so what he says is the opposite. All we need to do is to figure out my piece, right? The brick that I am polishing, what is mine to do, right? And that's what needs my focus, right? So my as a leader, right, my attention goes to the one brick that I am polishing, right? And that's what I'm putting into the path, and not about all the other things that are maybe not polished, right? No, your focus is on where your own agency is. And I think that's, at the end of the day, the one thing that counts. And if we all do that, there's nothing that we couldn't do within a few decades.
Thank you again, Otto. This is so inspiring. I can go on for hours with you as every single time. Thank you so much for your time, your generosity, this really transformational, inspiring chat, and for confirming what we're trying to do with Spread Love and hopefully bringing some inspiration. It might be, this is what's mine to do, and we're trying to bring this, hope and inspiration to the leaders across the world. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on, and for the work you are doing, and I'm very happy to be a small part of it. All the best.
Thank you all for listening to Spread Love in Organizations podcast. Follow us on LinkedIn and social media, subscribe to your preferred podcast platform, and connect with us on SpreadLoveIO.com. Most importantly, spread love in your organizations and spread the word around you to inspire others and amplify this movement our world so desperately needs.